From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!, broadcasting live from Copenhagen. It's Climate Countdown.
We are driven by three key words, and I would like you to repeat them after me. The first word is mobilize. Number two is resist and to transform. Resist, mobilize, transform.
Climaforum 09. The People's Climate Summit opens here in Copenhagen. Outside the official COP15 summit, we'll speak with Nigerian environmentalist Nemo Bassi and Sarah James, an advocate for the Gwich'in people in Alaska, as well as Arctic photographer Subankar Banerjee. Then the Environmental Protection Agency rules greenhouse gases are a danger to public health.
Is a step towards enduring pragmatic solutions to the enormous challenge of climate change.
We'll talk about U.S. climate change policy with the mayor of Denver, John Hickenlooper, and Damon Moglen of Greenpeace. But first, Aqsa Mahmoud of the Maldives warns of doing nothing on climate change.
If they don't take action, if they don't bring any change, our country, 360,000 strong, plus another million from another country, and all the countries in the same state, we will all be wiped out.
Aqsa is 15 years old. He's the climate ambassador from the Maldives. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're live in Copenhagen. The Obama administration has moved a step closer to regulating greenhouse gases. On Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency said 6 gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, endanger the environment and public health. The move would allow the EPA to take action against the gases without needing congressional approval. The EPA says it will now draft regulations to curb the emissions under the Clean Air Act. EPA administration spokesperson Lisa Jackson announced the move in Washington.
Today's action is a step towards enduring pragmatic solutions to the enormous challenge of climate change. It is a step towards innovation, investment, and implementation of technologies that reduce harmful emissions.
The New York Times is reporting over 20% of the nation's water treatment systems have violated the Safe Drinking Water Act over the last 5 years. More than 49 million people get their drinking water from the systems. While every single violation was reported, regulators took action in less than 6% of the cases. The disclosure comes ahead of a Senate hearing today on enforcement of water safety laws. The EPA is expected to soon unveil new regulations for overseeing the nation's water system. But critics have questioned their effectiveness because the EPA is still run by many officials who ignored the old regulations. The news follows the opening day of the Global Climate Summit here in Copenhagen. On Monday, environmental activists opened a parallel summit billed as the global civil society counterpart to the climate talks. Addressing the Climaforum's opening session, the Canadian author and activist Naomi Klein called for climate reparations to developing nations and stressed the urgency of a grassroots environmental movement.
We have to somehow offset the carbon we emitted coming here. How do we do it? We do it, or we try to do it, by using this incredible space, this historic convergence, to build the kind of global mass movement that will never, ever let our leaders get away with this kind of criminal negligence again. That is our task, my friends. It is awesome and fearsome. Think of it as the mother of all carbon offsets.
In the United States, dozens of people gathered outside the offices of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection Monday for a rally against mountaintop removal mining. The activists called for an immediate end to mountaintop removal, beginning with the blasting underway at Coal River Mountain, the last intact mountain on the historic Coal River Mountain Range. The protesters included the environmental activist and attorney Robert Kennedy, Jr. Meanwhile, in California, 29 people were arrested Monday at a protest outside the San Ramon headquarters of the oil giant Chevron. The group Mobilization for Climate Justice West organized the action to coincide with the Copenhagen summit's opening day. The oil giant Shell has won approval to begin drilling off Alaska's northwest coast. On Monday, the Interior Department approved Shell's license for 3 exploratory wells in the Chukchi Sea. Native and environmental groups have warned the drilling could chase away sea life and contaminate the ocean. On Capitol Hill, Senate Democrats have drafted a compromise measure that would essentially hand over the so-called public option to private insurance companies. Under the proposal, the government would no longer establish a public option to compete with insurers. Instead, the Federal Office of Personnel Management would hire the insurance companies to run the health plans. Democratic Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska, meanwhile, has introduced an amendment adding strict anti-abortion language into the Senate health care reform bill. Nelson's measure mirrors the controversial language included in the House bill sponsored by Michigan Democrat Bart Stupak. The measures would bar any woman who receives government health insurance subsidies from enrolling in an insurance plan that covers abortion. In Iraq, more than 100 people have been killed and over 160 wounded in a series of coordinated bombings. At least 5 areas of Baghdad were hit earlier today. It was one of the deadliest attacks in Iraq this year. The White House has announced President Obama plans to defend his decision to escalate the Afghan war when he accepts the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo later this week. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs said Obama will address critics of his orders to deploy over 30,000 additional troops.
We'll address directly the notion, I think that many have wondered, which is the juxtaposition of the timing for the Nobel Peace Prize and his commitment to add more troops into Afghanistan. That's obviously something that he will address.
In Iran, dozens of anti-government demonstrators were arrested Monday as part of an annual Student Day of protest. Iranian police blocked main roads and fired tear gas near main school campuses in Tehran. It was the latest in a series of crackdowns on opposition protests since Iran's disputed elections in June. In Indonesia, a former army officer has admitted that 5 Australian journalists were deliberately murdered while covering the U.S.-backed Indonesian invasion of East Timor in 1975. Speaking to the news magazine Tempo, former Indonesian Special Forces Commando Gatot Purwanto said the 5 were killed out of fear they would expose the invasion and killings of Timorese. Purwanto's admission is believed to be the first by an Indonesian military officer involved in the invasion. Monday marked the invasion's 34th year anniversary. In Chile, 6 people have been charged with the 1982 poisoning of ex-President Eduardo Frei Montalva. At the time of his death, Frei Montalva had been a vocal critic of the U.S.-backed military dictatorship led by General Augusto Pinochet. Chilean President Michelle Bachelet said Frei Montalva was likely killed for his stance.
I want to say that President Frei, in his time, was denouncing human rights violation, and this is probably the motive for the criminal actions that ultimately cost him his life. Therefore, it seems to me that here in Chile, justice takes a while, but it comes, and in this case, it has arrived, and we know that it helps us as a society.
Back in the United States, a Chicago resident has been charged with complicity in the 2008 attacks in the Indian city of Mumbai. Prosecutors say David Headley aided the attackers by conducting surveillance missions before the assault took place. Nearly 170 people were killed in the 3-day siege of Mumbai, including 6 Americans. In New York, the trial of a young U.S. citizen who's been held in 23-hour solitary confinement for nearly 3 years has been delayed until next month. Syed Fahad Hashmi is charged with providing material support to al-Qaeda in a case that rests on the testimony and actions of an old acquaintance who turned government informant after his own arrest. Hashmi is being prosecuted for a 2-week period when the informant stayed at his home carrying rain gear that was allegedly later delivered to al-Qaeda members in Pakistan. Hashmi's period in solitary confinement is believed to be one of the longest ever for a prisoner before trial. Hashmi's families and supporters continue to hold weekly rallies outside the Manhattan Federal Prison where he's jailed. This is Hashmi's brother, Faisal Hashmi.
And from the court interactions where we see him in court, you know, he looks like a shell of the person that he was before. He looks frail and he looks jittery. As you can imagine, people cannot stand solitary confinement for a day or 2 days or 3 days. He's been in straight solitary confinement ahead of his trial for 2.5 years without having a conviction because the government said so.
You can hear an extended interview with Faisal on our website at democracynow.org. And the Securities and Exchange Commission has filed civil charges against 3 former executives at what was once one of the nation's top subprime lenders. The 3 are accused of misleading investors before their company, New Century Financial, collapsed in 2007. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.